Hello, I'm Stephen Watson and welcome to this edition of A View from the Bridge, which we're doing on behalf of the Royal Navy and Royal Marines charity. We're back in the CTN studio for another fireside chat with leaders in the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines. This is a chance for us to connect you as supporters of the charity with our Navy's leadership team and to gain their insight and special perspective on the challenges and opportunities facing the service, as well as an update on current operations. The format, I'm sure you're familiar with it, is simple. I'm going to ask some questions to get the ball rolling, and then please send in your questions via the chat function on the Zoom link, and I'll put them to our guest. Now, in previous editions of The View from the Bridge, we've had the First Sea Lord, we've had the Second Sea Lord, we've had the Fleet Commander, we've had CJO, Chief of Joint Operations, in this chair. But the last time we did this, I met up with the captain of HMS Queen Elizabeth, Ian Feasey, on his actual bridge during the Atlantic Future Forum last September in New York Harbour. You can't quite see New York Harbour in the background there, but that's where we were. Now, today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Rear Admiral Jude Terry OBE, the Royal Navy's Director of People and Training. I'm the first female admiral in the Navy's almost 500-year history. Admiral, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming in for this fireside chat. I know we're going to have lots of questions coming in from the audience, but just to kick it off, Director of People and Training, what's the job?
Thanks very much for having me. It's a privilege to be here. The job was an amalgamation of a couple of two-star directorates. So it was ACOS PCAP, so Assistant Chief of Staff People Capability, and Flag Officer Sea Training for the individual training element of the Royal Navy. In broad terms, I'm responsible for the whole force workforce, so civilians, Royal Fleet Auxiliary, Royal Navy, Royal Marines, Reserves.
And that's about 40,000 people,
just a little bit under, but yes, not far off that. And on behalf of First Sea Lord and Second Sea Lord, I'm responsible for everything from how we recruit and attract our people and engage with organisations through URNU type activity, University Royal Naval Unit activity, all the way through to how we train them in individual training establishments. So that's everything from phase one, your Lympstons, your Rallies, your Dartmouths, and then through to phase 2 and 3 in Collingwood, as well as those establishments. Then how they live and work well, so uniforms, food, housing, accommodation.
Okay, some good issues. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those.
Some legal, healthcare, policing, and then how we help people leave well at the end of their time, whether that be after a short period or 44 years, of which we've had a few recently. It's essentially the people capability delivery element, and it is all about the fact that people have to be our most important asset, and in order for them to be the most important asset to deliver the lethality that we want, we have to look after them, their families, and their well-being. Right,
so quite a lot in your in-trade. Now, I saw you gave an interview to the Times, I think just in the run-up to Christmas. And you said, look, of all the issues that you want to take on as Admiral in this role, one of the key things is how you can offer everybody in the service a more flexible career structure. How are you getting on with that? You're 4 months into that.
We are that commitment. 4 months in, and the tagline, because everybody likes tagline, is a zigzag career or a continuum of employment. If we look at the world as it is today, it's very different to 30 years ago, 26 years ago when I joined, but more beyond that. Less people want to be deployed for excessive amount of times. More people do co-parenting, more people have responsibilities beyond, and not everybody wants to join forever. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to maximise our interaction with the civil service, our interaction with reserves. How flexible are we really with our reserves commitment? Where can we use people's skills in a particular role? How do we not keep people in their branches and just keep them in a stovepipe of their branch? How do we manage to use their skills, their education and their other interests in order to get the best from them? Defence has its own flexible working policy, but that tends to work better if you're in a shore-based organisation, because of course it's much easier to flex your working hours to do long days or short days, and those types of things. For us, we have to look a bit more innovatively at the front line. What we're doing is we're looking at where we can use our reserves on a commitment that perhaps is 4 months. Our offshore patrol vessels, the only reason they go to sea is partly because of a cohort of reservists who are able to plan their time and deploy in them. We're also looking to do an element of maximising people's skills within an opportunity and using flexible crewing.
So I get, I get the headlines and the commitments, but as I travel around the Navy, people say to me, look, for all the policy and for all the ambition, we have an RN people vision. It was enshrined into the integrated review, and the commitment there was to see less churn, more stability, and a better lived experience.
Yes. And
I think a lot of people would say, actually, that lived experience isn't living up to that promise.
Part of it is, if you look, we've had about 10 years where we have not been delivering in terms of our recruitment figures. We've had peaks and troughs, but that obviously means that if you're short of people who are particularly essential in going to sea, then what that means is that has an impact on the lived experience for that particular cohort.
But the IRN 23 said, we're going to sort, fully crew all the operational platforms, and we're going to recover all of the pinch points.
Did.
That was a commitment in 21 for 2023. Have we covered all the pinch points?
No, we haven't, because the world outside has changed. Right. So if you look at the recruiting environment, if you look at the economy, what we saw was that lots of people stayed during COVID, which is what we expected. In the uncertainty, a job they understood was much better. In terms of post-COVID, though, we've returned back to normal rates of voluntary outflow. And what that means is you've got to recruit more. We're privileged to be in a Navy that is growing for the first time in a very long time in order to deliver what we have now, plus Vanguard to Dreadnought, plus the frigate transition plan. And in order to do all of that, you have to grow. Of course, what that means is you have to change your recruitment strategy and your retention strategy in order to do that. And the difficult thing with people activity, the really difficult thing, is that it takes time. So we can all try and fix in a short time, and that's what we've done for some branches in the past. So we have thought we have fixed the marine engineering cohort because we have managed to keep some people for a particular period of time. However, we've done that, whether assigning them differently, giving them better, looking after their families better, or giving them more money. But ultimately, if you don't fix the underlying structural problems within that, the underlying structural operating model, then you're never going to do that.
What you call VO, the voluntary outflow rates, that is a key bit of your scorecard,
yes.
Isn't it? It's how do you keep that as low as it can be, really arrest that? And in certain areas of specialisation, like marine engineering, yes. I mean, you really want to put the brakes on any outflow because we're desperately short of marine engineers. So
you want to put the brakes on outflow. You want to use employment models differently in terms of whether you can use reservists. So we now have a marine engineering reserve cohort, which we never had before, and that allows you to sort out some shore billets where people can use their experience to support our ships. There's also a problem in the supply chain and in how we've maintained our ships. Of course, that has an impact on our people because when you come alongside, certain branches are able to step away, they're able to go home. If you're an engineer...
Marine engineers spend the whole weekend fixing
if you're a catering services, it's very similar. And so there is a big project ongoing in terms of the marine engineering under Second Sea Lord's direction, which is looking at how we combine all these things. My observation would be that what we've done in the past is we have got after individual elements of this. So we might have focused on money in the short term. We might have focused on a particular type of employment for one cohort. What we really need to do is do an end-to-end elevation of this and an understanding of it. That takes time, which is frustrating. And it's really frustrating if you're a marine engineer.
So what are these other levers? I mean, obviously, if you want to pay people fairly, and marine engineers, as an example, presumably there are lots of jobs that they could do outside the service for which they'll be, handsomely rewarded and tempted to those roles. But what other levers are at your disposal? I mean, and do you have from First and from Defence the flexibility to actually use those and be agile in the way that you intervene and make a difference?
We have an ability within our own cohort to do some measures. Most of the things have to be agreed on a tri-service basis. Because it is we have our own workforce cost budget, and then we have to ask for extra money or we have to ask for extra policy. There is a thing called the Haythornthwaite Review, which has just been done, which basically looks at the whole package for people. So previously, again, we've only gone after the money. And if you look in the Defence Policy book, we never take any policy out. We only ever add policy. So what you then end up with is a really complex picture that actually doesn't let you look after individuals as individuals. The Haythornthwaite study is saying, stop thinking we're all of one company, particularly across 3 services. We're not, and we haven't been for a really long time. Submariners have always been paid more money. Aviators have been paid more money. Hydrographers get a daily pay rate. So stop pretending that we are all of one company. Now let's look at a tailored package for individuals.
And is there anything you can learn from the private sector? I mean, you're creating something that hopefully will look good and work for the Navy, but we're not too proud, are we? Can we?
You'll be pleased
we don't
to
have the institutional arrogance to say we fixed it.
No,
Can we learn from elsewhere?
Be pleased to hear I've spent quite a lot of time working with a couple of our big industry partners and most recently BAE in terms of and Rolls-Royce in terms of understanding engineering SQEP is short in the UK and pan global. So how do we go about doing that? We're also working with our allies. So we've been doing some work with Australia, New Zealand, Canada in particular, in order not only to understand what works, but also what doesn't work. So where not to go because it didn't work in their cohort. The Haythornthwaite Review, we have put in for 3 pilots for the Haythornthwaite Review because we are absolutely clear engineering is a defence issue. But for us, it stops our ships going to sea. The other 2 services, it's a very different dynamic. And in order to stop the ships going to sea, what you end up doing then is impacting the lives of others. You'll be aware of our offshore patrol vessels and our survey vessels. They all work in a multi-crewed system, as did Montrose, obviously, for her 3 and a bit years in the Gulf, and Lancaster is now taking that on. Our ambition is to multi-crew every platform within the Royal Navy within the bounds of reality. So we won't be doing the carrier because of the carrier's operating profile. That doesn't make any sense to try and swap out. If we do that for every other platform and understand the skills that are required depending on where they are in the globe, what you then bring is stability. And what most people say is they didn't join the Royal Navy for the money. Money isn't what makes them do it, but money might be the thing that changes them if stability isn't good, if family provision isn't good.
I mean, there are various things I'd like to come on, but on just on that issue, I mean, I know First Sea Lord has been quite forthright on forward deployed platforms, multiple crews rotating through. I mean, the logic sounds fine. Again, are you confident that as that rolls out, the lived experience is going, will meet the promise that it will actually provide that stability and so forth?
Yes, as long as we understand that each theatre will be subtly different. So what works for Batch 1 OPV around the UK, where you can guarantee a watch rotation and you can get off the ship and you can be home within, less than 24 hours, even if you live on the other side of the world, doesn't work if you're the OPV that's out in the Indo-Asia Pacific because it takes you longer to get home. There is obviously much more length of sea passage. You need different skills for that. So as long as we are bright enough not to just do a workforce model that lumps a certain number of people, then absolutely I am certain it will deliver. But that doesn't mean everybody will like it, because we are all individual people. And I was privileged to hear Claire Thompson give her debrief from her time as CO Montrose, and she said you would meet probably 50-50. 50% of people loved it, 50% of people didn't like it.
So there's some hearts and minds you still have to win, win here. We're going to put your questions to the Admiral. So now's really the moment to start typing them in the chat function. I've got a couple coming up here. But before we go to those, I do want to ask you about culture and behaviour. And I know this is a difficult subject, and it's presumably right at the top of your in tray. But last October, the Navy was forced to order an investigation into allegations of bullying and sexual harassment of women, primarily in the submarine service. And that was following a number of whistleblowers and victims having come forward and spoken to the media. The first Sea Lord, I think very, very quickly, and he couldn't have been clearer, he said this is abhorrent, and that there's no place for that behaviour in the Royal Navy. Policy of zero tolerance, anyone found culpable will be held accountable. That was last October. I appreciate you know, there's a limit to what you can say, and investigations and so forth probably ongoing. But where are we on this? Because this was very troubling to the naval community and the naval family, and it was very upsetting to learn of these accounts.
It wasn't anything less than upsetting sitting in the seat as Director of People and Training, and I can absolutely assure you that everybody in the senior leadership team of the Navy was felt the same upset at the service we all love being brought into disrepute. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that 98 to 99% of our people are the most amazing people in the world. They join because they want to serve, and they join because they want to be in a team of people who do great stuff. Unfortunately, there are, as within all organisations, a small element who don't necessarily abide by that. The zero tolerance policy was brought in by Centre. We already had the ability to deal with these things in a zero tolerance way. It's about understanding how to include people, and it's about being confident in the system around you to get after that. One of the things you need to understand, coming back to your point actually about deployed platforms, working hard, understanding the impact that has on people, we need to understand that. But it's very clear, if someone is found to have in any way delivered unacceptable behaviour, whether a crime or whether just in terms of what is acceptable, they will be dealt with, and they will be removed from the service if appropriate, or they will be taken through court-martial or trial if appropriate. What are we doing about it though? Because it's about how it works. And interestingly, one of the things we found is, again, we've got lots of really good practice. So you have lots of good leadership packages. You have lots of climate surveys. We've adopted the climate survey from the Army. Having spent a lot of my time in the Army do climate surveys, and they do them really well. We see them as a bit of a threat. And so it's about changing that behaviour, changing the perception.
What puzzles people is that, you know, the victims report that the behaviour and the abuse is often conducted by really very senior people up the command chain, people with big responsibility and people responsibilities. How is it that the officers, can move through a career in the service, and in a way not be found out? I mean, how does it come to a moment where, you know, it takes almost the media to shine a light on it, that we then act?
We were already acting, I guess, again, would be my first point. That does not detract from the newspaper stories in October. But we already, last year, removed 5 COs without the need for media. That's not a great statistic. I'm not saying it's a great... What I'm saying is when people believe in the system actually works. I can't comment on how it used to be. All I can comment on is where we are now. Our leadership package...
Does that say something about the way that we are, you know, developing those leaders and COs and actually, you know, the care and the interventions that we're making, you know, as individuals come up to that moment of big responsibility as a CO? But it seems, you know, 5 COs out of a cohort of, I don't know how many COs we've got, that's not a great statistic.
No, it's not. But actually, if what you want is you want the system to be better, actually it's quite a good statistic, because it shows that the people who feel that they are disadvantaged, that they are being having to put up with unacceptable behaviour, trust the system, and we will do something about them.
Okay.
What are we doing, and how does it change? You live in a confined space. We work and live together. That's the reality of how we operate. In terms of our leaders, what we've always been very good at is looking at in terms of from the perspective of the boss down. What we're now looking to do is how we understand how a ship feels, how a submarine feels, how an air squadron feels. We're looking to do more practical examples of training and create an environment where we can have a conversation. I was privileged to do a town hall with our Compass network and discuss a number of things. And the biggest pitch we came up with in the end was what you need to do is be able to have that difficult conversation where I say, Stephen, you've offended me, and you say, I don't understand how. That's what culture is. That is believing in where you are. It's knowing what it is you want to do. And to do that, you have to provide that safe space. Equally, there is, you need to be clear on what your leaders are there for. And our leaders are there to drive a ship, to command a squadron, but they are also there to be part of a leader of their people, because in terms of people capability, that's where you go. It isn't, I'm not excusing what happened. You can't excuse it. But it's about everybody in the system being brave enough to call it out. And when you do call it out, actually what you start to see is many more people stopping it at a lower level because they feel that the system they will be entrusted with the system.
Some people have suggested that maybe alcohol or a culture around alcohol is part of the problem. What's your take on that?
I think banning alcohol brings its own culture issues, as we can see from some of our allies and partners. There is work ongoing to understand how we manage it in terms of operating. When I joined 26 years ago, the world was much different in terms of alcohol. Most of our young sailors actually very rarely drink.
Being in the gym, having a beer.
Yeah, and so actually it's that middle cohort to the senior, and it's how we manage that. It's about treating people as adults until they don't behave as adults. But we are definitely working. There are a couple of studies through INM and other activities to look at how you manage it. But banning it doesn't seem to work either, and so we need to understand where the grown-up treaty is between you and me about how we're all going to behave. And when you don't behave well, we're going to call it out.
Got it. Right. We have lots of questions coming in. So let me start. You're very welcome to put your name on the questions, but and I can attribute them to you. But first one here is, what specialist areas other than engineering can the reserves be deployed for in frontline service, and how are the reserves being targeted and prepared for such deployments? Now, I think it's fair to say the reserves have had a slightly mixed journey over the last few years. But I mean, do you now, are they a sort of a treasure for us again?
They are an absolute treasure. I am privileged to have Mel Robinson as ComRes work for me, and they are part of our employment continuum, zigzag career, call it whatever you want. But there's two great examples. So one is cyber and digital skills. And at the moment, our Operational Advantage Centre is delivering real-life support to operations around the world, mainly driven by a cohort of our reservists who are able to use their niche skill set to be targeted and to work remotely in order to deliver that. That is absolutely huge. We're also, we've reverted back in the Royal Naval Reserve to Sailor First. And they are therefore trained in order to deliver those QM duties, bosun mates duties, those types of things, waterborne, and they then become, and in our offshore patrol vessels, that is absolutely where they are. We're also looking at general warfare and what that means, but we've always had submarine teams. The submarine control is done by reservists. The information ops team, they're mainly reservists. What we're looking at doing is all their training is basically the same training as the regulars. We just do it in subtly different packages. And one of the benefits about being P&T is what you do is you get all of that entwined, and then you're very clear on how you deliver that.
And of course, the other great advantage of reservists is they have, other career experiences and insights,
yes.
and that adds immeasurably to
and what we're trying to do is how we manage those skills for everybody to understand where they might be. So I was in the COVID cell in NCHQ for right at the start. We needed a scaffolder. We didn't have an ability to check that, but we did know some people by name who were in there, and so we were able to find that. We're just looking to how we get our data better to understand our people.
Okay, I mean, just one little bit. I met a reservist at a passing out at Dartmouth, who just casually in conversation explained to me that actually in his day job he was working on the manned mission to Mars for NASA. And I said, are you pulling my leg? And he said, no, seriously, that is what I do. but no one in the Navy had any understanding of that. So there seems to be a bit of a process. I mean, he should be working with our CTO and all sorts of things.
And that's absolutely where we need to get to. And they've now got My Navy app. That sounds a bit flippant, but what it means is they're able to, our individual people are able to be proactively put their skills in.
Let's take a couple more questions. I mean, a related one actually is about the cadet forces here. Do you view, CCF cadets as a potential source of recruitment, both for regular and reserves, and the RFA? Are they an attractive talent pool? And in which case, should you put more resources into embracing them and reaching out to them?
The good thing is, the reason I am smiling is that they are absolutely a huge resource pool, and they are a resource pool for our recruitment, but they're a resource pool for being advocates for what it is we do. First Sea Lord has made it very clear that we will invest in them, whether that is in terms of they've just been given a building in Portsmouth in Whale Island in order to put our headquarters together. So you have the VCC, the CCF, and the Sea Cadets, as well as the Sea Scouts, all in one place. That will help. We are looking to move elements of the cadets in terms of the water-based experience further out from just Portsmouth, because Portsmouth's quite a long drive for a number of our cadets organisations. And what we're looking to do is to be much more engaged on a personal, individual basis with the units to understand them. And also they're volunteers, because most of the volunteers who make this happen are hugely committed to the service in whatever role they're doing. So absolutely they're a core part, they're a big part of the naval family, and there's a lot of work ongoing under Phil Waterhouse and Gavin McDougall in order to make that work. Okay, got a question from Pete Sanderman, who is actually behind a great website called Navy Lookout. And the Royal Fleet Auxiliary seems to be particularly struggling to recruit and retain right now. Do you have the power, in your power, to improve the conditions for these civil servants? And if so, what's been done? I was down visiting Lyme Bay 2 weeks ago, actually, and we talked a lot about this. Part of the issue with the RFA is, of course, they wear a uniform and look very similar to us, but actually they're on a civil service element. And we've been working really hard. David Eagles and Steve Morehouse and my team have been working really hard with Vicky Smith, who's the head of HR in Defence, to understand the nuance of the RFA. Because, of course, if you don't know, you just see them in our uniform and you see them as sailors. Part of the reason they have struggled to recruit, I think, is because of the profile of what it is they do and where they sit. So we tend to recruit at the upper end when either you've left the Navy or you've had your deep sea merchant Navy career and you want to come back. I was really struck by the people I met on Lyme Bay. They were experienced, they'd been back out in industry, they'd come back in. The zigzag career was absolutely there. There were two submariners sat around the table when I was having a chat to them. But what we do need to do is make them a core part of our recruitment campaign, whilst acknowledging that they are subtly different. So yes, we do. We absolutely own the majority of the levers, Standfast Pay, which sits in centre, but we are working really hard to make that clear. Academics, access to gym, all those things. Then every RFA person now goes through Raleigh and Dartmouth. That makes it, we are able to help them train and to get more education. So yes, it's just not as quick as we'd like. Right. They're coming in thick and fast, so we'll keep the answers short. Andy Titterick says, "Hi Jude." Hello, Andy. Great to see you doing such a good job. Right, this is a personal question, and you're looking after the heartbeat of the Royal Navy, our people. What was the appointment that you feel shaped your career most, and why? And what's your advice to others that might be considering reaching for the stars? So obviously working with Andy was the key appointment that shaped me. No, I was the military assistant to the Chief of Joint Operations, which as a logistics officer was unheard of. They were always warfare officers or Army equivalents or RAF equivalents. I was privileged to work for two of the best three-star generals ever. There were days when I didn't think that, I'm not going to lie, at the heart of permanent joint headquarters for 2 and a bit years. What that taught me was how to lead, how to focus on the operational output and to challenge and to enhance all of those. What would I say to everybody? Believe in yourself. Do the jobs that you enjoy. Don't do the jobs that someone tells you should do, whatever walk of life you're in. because if you enjoy the job, you're going to do the best you can. But I am absolutely surprised every day that I'm sat here as the Navy's first female admiral. So there wasn't really a plan, Andy. I didn't change that much.
Okay. Well, you reached you reached for the stars. They're up there somewhere. Right. Question from Simon Black, coming back actually to marine engineering. He has been speaking to some corporate CEOs who actually apologised to him for having hired 4 marine engineers into their technology company. Wonder which one it was. He went on to say how terrific they were, how brilliantly trained they were. But could there be an agreement with industry? I suppose what Simon's saying, almost a protocol that they don't come poaching, and they do 5 to 8 years before having that opportunity to leave, and maybe it's more choreographed. And I suppose this is also being brought into sharp focus with AUKUS.
Yes.
And there is a feeling that all the talent sitting in Barrow might well be encouraged to go to Australia and maybe not return. So
rather than an MOU, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to a point where we work together as an enterprise. Instead of that tech company poaching them, what we're looking at how we transition our workforce backwards and forwards, how we manage it in that way. That comes back to that flexible career. But absolutely, we are having conversations. As I say, I had a couple of conversations recently with a couple of engineering companies where I said, this isn't going to work because you're going to take them and then we're going to ask for them back. You have the advantage of being able to pay a lot of money, but actually you don't have any of the other things. And what we're finding is some people are coming back. So it's definitely got to be an enterprise work together. We need more freedoms in order to manage money. As I say, it's not about the money, but if someone's going to offer you £20,000, it's really difficult to turn that down. So how can we do better at that? It is definitely a partnership. And in AUKUS terms, very definitely, we have learnt some lessons from that. And there is already an agreement between First Sea Lord and the Chief of the Australian Navy that we will work out a way to make this clear.
Okay. Can take a couple more online, and then I'd like to turn to a couple of challenges I know you have around accommodation and so forth. Adam Klink is online, says, thank you very much, Admiral, for being here. Data sits at the heart of a modern military capability. Are there plans to create a bespoke career path for mission data warfare specialists, in addition to traditional warfare, engineering, fleet, air arm routes, and so forth? So it's quite a detailed question, but at the heart of it is a recognition of just how the operating landscape is changing at pace.
Yeah, at the moment, we have 30 branches and about 300 sub-branches. That can't be right in a workforce of the size of ours. So we're doing a lot of work in professions and disciplines to streamline that and to look at the baseline. Part of that is digital experts, cyber experts, and understanding that. Paul Beattie is actually leading a lot of work as the head of Navy Digital in how we do this pan defence. But absolutely, there is a requirement to grow people in order to do those things. Will there be a specific warfare branch for those who want to do it? Probably not, but will we be able to manage the skills within a profession that says you are an individual who understands warfare, data and analysis? Absolutely. And I have created a people insights and an intelligence and analysis cell in my team because I'm acutely aware we understand a lot about the Red Force. We're really not very good at understanding our Blue Force and understanding what are the trends that make them go and how they work. So yes, I just can't guarantee it's going to be called what you just described, Adam.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's return to the lived experience and accommodation. I mean, this is a sorry tale, and it's across the whole of defence. But in February, so a couple of months ago, the Second Sea Lord had to step in at Collingwood to close the Vivian block, which had been nicknamed Colingrad. I mean, the conditions were nothing short of truly appalling in that accommodation block. There were crumbling walls, there was overcrowding, use of camp beds. The fridges were infested with maggots, apparently. How has it come to this? And you know, is there anything else on your immediate closure list? But how do you sort this? Because this is the 21st century.
I think there's a few things in there. So we'll start with Vivian itself. It was reopened throughout COVID in order to allow us to continue recruitment because we had smaller cohorts of people. What we didn't do was have a plan for how to get out of that post-COVID. Lessons learned, we needed to have a plan and we didn't have one. Second actually comes back to the culture point. Too many people had accepted that that was okay. And what we have done under First Sea Lord, Second Sea Lord, Fleet Commanders guys and myself is be curious, challenge. It's not acceptable. Would you put up with that in your own home? No. So why are you putting up with it here? There is a bigger contractual point, which was we had a fix on fail contract for 15 years. Again, none of us would look at our own flat or house and have a fix on fail contract. That's where we were. And what has happened in the transition is we've gone to a let's not do that, let's maintain buildings contract, and we're getting better. But my bigger point is our training estate, most of it was built in the 60s and 70s. It's huge, it's spread out. And if what we want to do is to give our people the best lived experience and get the people to the front line trained faster in order to do their job, we probably need to look at a fundamental element of how we do this. Part of that is training estate's quite expensive to maintain. What we need to do is work out what we want the future to look like in 2040, 2050 and work backwards from that. So it's complicated, it is unacceptable. We should never have had people living like that. But again, they were hard-working people trying to keep the wheels on that bus.
You're being brave tonight, and this is a privileged private conversation. I mean,
except it's not.
Who's to blame? I mean, is this a DIO problem? Is this a sort of institutional problem that we've just failed to address? But it beggars belief that this goes on.
I think you can't pin the blame on anybody in an individual, because the DIO setup was probably not fit for purpose. The contract was probably not fit for purpose. We didn't empower our COs to put their hand up and say, this is unacceptable. And we didn't enable them to fix it with the right amount of money. Ultimately, as Director of People and Training, it sits with me. The answer is we need to do better going forward. And that's one of the things we are looking to do. But I would offer that the training estate is expensive to run. If you look at the costs for where we need to go, it's about there's a gap of about £2 billion. You're faced with a choice of lethality, accommodation, and because we haven't put people at the heart of everything we've done, really, we've often picked the lethality and hoped that the rest would be good.
I mean, you reflected in there that, we're partly all to blame because we just accept what we find. Are you now saying to everybody, look, shout it out?
Yes.
I mean, do not accept this.
Yes.
And, I don't know, whistle blow, send you emails,
I get lots on Twitter. And I get lots in my own email. But actually, more importantly, our teams now feel much more empowered. There was a feeling that if they raised it, it wouldn't get anywhere. There was a feeling of self-censorship because if you've been given a budget and we're struggling for money, particularly Resourcedale, because there's never quite enough of that, actually, how are you going to be prioritised? We've got into a habit of self-censoring and our teams are now not doing that. And I'm really pleased to say that the training establishments that I have a responsibility for are very definitely not doing that. And they are then bringing it up to me and I'm bringing it up to second for a priority call. That's the way it should be done.
Okay. Keep your questions coming. I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. Got one here from Martin Ewens, who again says, thank you very much for your time this evening. How do you see individual and collective training evolving together in the next 10 years as the RN bases more frigates permanently overseas?
This is really good because we were at a meeting the other day with the Fleet Commander and we talked about this. Drew, Stacey and I need to work together in order to deliver a combined effort. To do that, you need the balance right. So phase one training is always going to be face-to-face. Always going to be. There's bits you can do virtually, but phase one training is about understanding who you are, understanding your team, becoming a sailor, Royal Marine, RFA individual. And therefore, it's always going to be face-to-face. The exciting bit is when you get into phase 2 and 3 and how can you connect those so that you find yourself connected doing individual training as part of a bigger war game. For those of you on the call, you'll have heard of .cm, which has never really progressed very far. It was our way of looking at synthetics. What we've now got is a way of combining realistic training plus virtual training, the individual element and the collective training. I am absolutely clear individual training needs to stay in this directorate, because it's how you get your people. The people are nothing without the training. But actually, it has to absolutely weld into that. And there is a big project which Drew Stacey is leading on behalf of Fleet Commander, and we are completely lockstep on how we do that. The training estates review will help with some of that. I was really impressed during lockdown at the Royal Naval Air Engineering Squadron and Sea Survival Squadron. They did brilliant stuff in terms of amalgamating, innovating, challenging, being curious. We need to look at that for everywhere, and that's how we do it. But they have to be combined. They cannot be two separate entities.
Now, I mean, one of the things that most people in the service have not trained for, but it's a sign of how adaptable our people are, is to step in when the civilian authorities need support from the military. And there's been a spate of recent industrial action, and the Royal Navy, Air Force, Army have all stepped in as the government has requested. What I think has surprised me, and perhaps most people don't know, is just the scale of that. So I visited Prince of Wales in dry dock at the moment, up in Rosyth. And over the last few months, I think 3,500 man days of her ship's company have been provided to the civilian authorities, border force, and other activities. And I'm sure our people have done that with good grace, and they've lent into it, and it's been hugely appreciated. But it's not what people signed up for. And is that really what naval personnel should be doing? And how are we either compensating or acknowledging that extra commitment that's being made by those people?
So the first thing is just for some context. So pre-COVID, we were down about between 500 and 800 augmentees, that's what we call the people who go and help, across defence. Of our percentage, we had about 22%. That included places like Bahrain. So it was really small and manageable. During COVID, it went up to about between 2,000 and 4,000, depending on the day. It has stayed at about that level, at about 2,000. We've now done some work that means our Royal Navy element of that is now down at 19%, which doesn't sound much, but makes a huge difference, particularly when 50% of our senior workforce sit in other directorates and other TLBs. What we're doing about our individuals, though, is we did join to serve the King and the country. That's what we did, and we're to do that wherever we are requested. It's hard. It's particularly hard for our individuals who gave up Christmas leave, etc. But absolutely, all our people understand their job is to serve the King and country wherever. Now, having spoken to a few of them, particularly in Prince of Wales, they seem to do a bit of a tour of the hotels at the airports, and they were all, as you said, good grace. The way we managed it was they were at airports closest to home. They did all get stand downs. That doesn't make it right, but yes. I think augmentation is here to stay. Commitments in head office are working really hard to minimise it. There's a big bit of work on homeland defence and homeland security. What is that? But ultimately, and in terms of recognition, there was everything from honours and awards to captain's awards to actually I was privileged to give the Royal Navy Royal Marines Charity Awards to those individuals. And thank you very much to the charity who were able to support us in doing that. But when I spoke to most people, they didn't want to do it again, but they absolutely understand what it was to do.
I did hear a lovely story from Prince Wales that some of her ship's company were doing border force activities over the Christmas period, and were getting an amazing reaction from the general public and travellers, to the extent that travellers were going through and then going into duty free and buying something and then coming back to the border gate and giving gifts to some.
Yeah, I did, and interesting. They all saw a really interesting side of life. A different side of life, which is one of the things you join the Navy for, isn't it? Get a different perspective.
Just come back to where we are with recruitment. There's a comment here just reflecting on the fact that the trained strength of the RN has declined by about 1% in the last year. How do you manage the lack of people, on the front line in the short term, gapping billets or platforms or not deploying at all?
Big questions. And what we've done before is we've spread the gaps. We've worked out what the minimum is to get people to sea. We've moved people from one ship doing OST or one deployment, and then we've moved them to fill another gap. We can't do that because people vote with their feet. Their families vote with their feet, and it's just not good for anyone's mental fitness, resilience, personal life or professional life. What we're looking at doing is making some really tough choices about platforms. How can we do them? Being realistic. What is the minimum? And we're also looking at where we can work with our industry partners and where things we have always done because that was the thing we thought we should do, how can we do better? And if I don't take engineering, if I take catering services for a moment, which is close to my heart, having been the Logs branch manager, what we did for a little while was we provided contractual support. We also actually put 10 reservists on Queen Elizabeth for her first trip across the Atlantic, because who didn't want to be part of the first trip of the Queen Elizabeth class? We've lost that a little, and so we're looking at some of those. But in terms of catering services, how can we help them with contract support? In the past, we've struggled a little because of the secondary and tertiary duties that all our people are doing, because they're brilliant first aiders and they're brilliant fog lookouts and all of those, but we just need to think differently. And then for the future, what we're doing is we're working with James Parkin as the head of the Navy after next in Develop. How do we design it out? How do we design this out? Because we're not suddenly going to get more people. The Navy has to grow, and we need to give them a career that is worthwhile, fulfilling, and provides them and their family the stability. You can't do that by managing gaps. But what I would say is that was easier to do in decline, because we're now growing for the first time ever, first time in a very long time. You can see those things a lot more, and it matters a lot more. Your people retention matters a lot more. Whereas I think before we all thought we just recruit a few more. And of course, then the economic place we find ourselves in doesn't help us.
Now, obviously your primary focus is on our people, recruiting, training, retaining them. But where do families fit into all of this? I was recently on a Families Day in HMS Defender. And hats off to the ship's company, because the ship left Portsmouth on a day run with 500 souls aboard, so 350, families and children, and lots of children running around pressing every button and putting their fingers in every door. Everybody came home safe. No one, no one lost a limb, but it really just brought home how important families are, loved ones, children, parents, in supporting what the serving community do. And a Families Day is a way for a ship and the Navy, I suppose, to say a little thank you. But more broadly than that, how do we embrace this hugely supportive and enabling extended family, if you like?
I'm really clear that their families are part of the Royal Navy family. And the really interesting thing with the Royal Navy is that our families tend not to congregate around port areas because they've moved previously and then discovered that their loved one has got on a ship or a submarine or in an aircraft and gone away, and they've then been left where they are. So our people's families we have the data that proves they tend to live where their support is. What does that mean for us? It means it's harder for us to do family support, and we've probably not focused on it enough. We've relied a lot on charities doing it for us. That's not right. But what there needs to be is a charitable partnership. And if I look in Faz Lane, which was where my first job was and is very close to my heart, that's a different community. And particularly with the submarine base being there, the moving everybody there as a kind of submarine hub. What we've done recently is we've enhanced Drumfork Centre. We've looked at better welfare provision because we didn't really understand it, and now we do. And each community needs to be looked at subtly differently. One of my really difficult things, and I was working really hard with Adrian Bell on this before he moved on, is data protection. Because I only have a relationship officially with the sailor, RFA person, reservist, Royal Marine. I don't have a relationship with their family. They can, of course, approach us and they can go through our charities, our welfare. We have a thing called the Forum, the Royal Navy Forum, which is absolutely where we should be pushing. At the moment, we need permission from the families to get us. I've got a couple of ideas about how, when people pass out of Lympstone, Dartmouth or Raleigh, they're given something that signs them up as the family. I'm still trying to make that work, but that's where I want to go. But they're absolutely crucial. And everything we do, from our accommodation to our sport and provision to our when they're deployed, when families are deployed, that's what we need to do. There are just a number of barriers which we just need to knock down and we need to get round. at the moment, that's just been a little bit harder than it should be.
Okay. I mean, I guess, you've referenced the charities and obviously the RNRMC are key to this. We've got a question here, actually from one of the trustees of the charity, Kate Phibbs-Wiltshire, saying, "Hi Jude, thanks again for being on the bridge. Question is really about how the RNRMC can, the work that it does in supporting the serving community, but what do you think has been the biggest impact that the charity has been able to make? Brackets, putting you on the spot, exclamation mark. But what opportunities do you see really for future collaboration? Where does this go? The RNRMC is the Navy's charity. Is there more that it can do?
So it is the Navy's charity, but actually the strength of the service charities is that they all have their own particular cohort that they appeal to, that they engage with. So the Naval Families Federation, the Naval Children's Charity, that's before I get into the RMA and all of those types of things. There's a lot in there. For me, the biggest thing from my own perspective is that the RMC gives us an ability to cohere activities. So I was... when I became my job before this, I wanted to understand what the Navy must do in this provision of families, because we got it wrong. In some areas we couldn't do anything, and in others we did lots. And we should be able to offer our people the same, wherever they're based, in deepest, darkest Cornwall or North Scotland, we should be able to offer them the same. I did some mapping work, and what the RNRMC was able to do for me was it was able to cohere the voices of all the other service charities and be one person who could sit in a room with us while we tried to work it out.
You said Adrian Bell, the chief executive, has just moved on. There's going to be an announcement very shortly about the new chief executive. When you sit down in that first meeting with the new CEO of the charity, what's on the top of your agenda with him? How
do we cohere all our activity so that if someone has a problem, they know where to go, they know who to get involved with, and they don't have to knock on 7 doors? Because at the moment, it's really complicated. If you were a Wren, you're entitled to stuff from the Wrens BT or the Wrens Association, but you're also entitled to some things from the Naval Families Federation. How do we make that easy for our people? Because that's what's really important. The RNRMC and all our other charities, Greenwich Hospital, all of those do brilliant work individually. But for me, that is the key. How do I make it work better for our service people and their families, such that there is an individual touch point where we help them transition from the service, where we help the family while someone's deployed, where we help veterans who have lost their way slightly and people are bringing. How do we do that? For me, that's crucially important. For the service and for our serving sailors and our Royal Marines, there are probably a number of other things, the gifts that we give, that we are able to give our people when they've done 40 plus years retiring. That's a huge thing. That's a really important thing. And those types of things. So there will always be those little, but for me, the strength is us working together as partners, and I can't manage across the 200 plus Navy charities. We just can't. And how do we maximise that better?
And unashamedly now, a plug for the charity. I was privileged to serve as a trustee in the charity, now one of the vice presidents. And I think, a large number of everybody watching this evening, participating in this, are members of the Nelson's Company, which is a very special network of those who are supporting the RNRMC. And I would urge everybody to sign up if you haven't already done so. And I'm sure when we have the list of everyone who was here this evening, we'll drop you an email afterwards.
So I would offer absolutely a big plug for charity, a big plug for the other charities who work in individual areas and really provide some really niche specialisations that we need. But also we need to do better as a service. We need to recognise what it is that charities do for us, not take them for granted, and work out what we should be doing as an employer of our people. Because I think we might have forgotten a little bit of that on the way, and the charities have had to step in. And I'm grateful for that.
Okay. We're almost out of time. The hour has whizzed by, and I'm sorry if I haven't got to all of the questions. Maybe I'll send them to you afterwards.
Very happy with that.
But I do want to, I know you've taken great care not to define yourself and your career by the fact that you are the Navy's first female admiral, but it is nevertheless something that, you know, sits on your shoulders, and you've reached for the stars and you've achieved it. And it was when you were promoted to admiral. I mean, that was an extraordinary moment, and it you know, it was historic. I mean, as you reflect on that, and you know, you're now into this role, and I think there is now a second female admiral. So you're not there by yourself, and presumably in the years to come there'll be dozens and dozens of female admirals. But what went through your mind when you received that promotion signal and knew that you were going to be the very first?
I had to apply for the job. So the first thing was, when I applied, I didn't know whether I was the best candidate or not. That was getting told I had the job was the biggest smile on my face, because if you believe in people, then this is the best job to be in. It then dawned on me I was going to be the Navy's first female admiral, and I didn't really know quite how to deal with that. And 15 months on, 16 months on, I have reflected that it is an important role, and as much as I think I'm just doing my job, when I went to visit Prince of Wales recently, one of the young female sailors had said to the captain, "She's great," and he said, "We don't even know her." And he said, "No," she said, "No, but she looks more like me than anyone I've ever seen who's in that position." And I have reflected on that in the last 16 months. It is important. If we want an inclusive Royal Navy, people need to see that they can come up through the system. The culture you described particularly hurt because it's not a service I want to be in. It's not a service I want people to worry about sending their children into. And so there is a reflection as I've gone through the 16 months that it is absolutely a position which I'm privileged to be in, and which I probably should reflect on a little more in how I do my business. But amazing, and a great honour. But as you say, there will be lots more.
There will indeed. I think on that note, we probably ought to draw stumps, as they say. This has been a fascinating discussion, and you know, on everybody's behalf watching, I mean, a huge thank you to you.
Thank
you
you
have
for
such
having me.
an incredibly busy diary for coming into the studio for talking for an hour or so. So we wish you well in everything that you're doing, and come back and tell us perhaps in 6 months' time or whatever how you've got on with some of these activities.
I would love to. And equally, if anyone's got any good ideas about how we can fix things, I am up for all good ideas.
Your door is open. Yeah, so just finally, thank you very much for joining in. We always try and do this very punctually, so I think we're absolutely on the hour. So thank you for logging in. I don't know exactly when the next View from the Bridge will be. We've got various asks out to leading Royal Marines and naval admirals for the next View from the Bridge, but hopefully we'll get another one into the schedule before the summer. Thank you very much. See you again soon.